The average price of a home in Durham region has dropped nearly 30% since the peak of the market in 2022, and some areas of Durham region have seen even bigger drops, which I just covered in my last video. But not every area has experienced the same loss in value. So in this video, we're going to dive into 4 areas of Durham region that have held their value the best since 2022 and talk about why prices haven't dropped in those areas like they have in most other parts of Durham region. I'll be using the same criteria as I did for my last video on areas that saw the biggest price drops. We'll be looking at data from communities in Pickering all the way to Clarington and comparing the average sale price from Q1 of 2022 to the average sale price in Q1 of 2025. If you enjoy this video, all I ask is that you hit that like button to help me reach more people like you, and consider subscribing if you want to follow what's really happening in our local real estate market. The first area I want to start with is the number 1 area that, according to the data, has held its value the best. But I don't think that that's entirely accurate, and here's why. Rural Clarington, going by the numbers, has only seen a 6.9% loss in value since Q1 of 2022. But here's why I won't crown it number 1 on our list. Just like my last video where I excluded rural Pickering and rural Whitby, these rural areas cover huge amounts of land, often larger than all the other communities in those cities combined. And the properties that sell there vary a lot compared to a typical subdivision where there are lots of similar homes to compare. In these rural parts of the region, you've got acreage properties, farmhouses, custom luxury homes, and the data can be easily skewed because you're comparing things that aren't really comparable. Rural Clarington has all of those things, but there is some consistency between the smaller communities within it, like Enniskillen, Hampton, and Salina. According to the data in Q1 of 2022, there were 30 sales at an average price of $1,485,000. And in Q1 of 2025, there were 24 sales at an average price of $1,383,000. That's a price decline of only 6.9%, which is far below what most areas have seen. However, when I dug into the actual sales, there's a bit of a mixed story. I found a surprising number of high-end luxury custom homes that sold in 2025 for the same price, or in some cases more, than they had sold for back in 2023 in the same condition. So even with the changes in the market, demand for homes in this area has remained more stable compared to most other communities. Prices and the number of sales haven't dropped at the same rate as the rest of the region. That doesn't mean that this area hasn't seen losses in value, but it was much harder to find examples of homes that sold at big losses over the last 3 years compared to most other places. The very few examples I did find were mostly older, outdated homes that sold at a premium near the peak and then resold at a 20 to 25% loss more recently. While I can't say with 100% certainty why homes here have held their value better than others, I do know that big homes on big lots just outside of town are still desirable. And another factor that might contribute to that retention in value is that many of these homes are extremely unique. Unlike a home in a typical subdivision where if you and the seller can't agree on a price, you can usually walk away and find a very similar home nearby, some of these higher end rural properties are one of a kind. If a buyer falls in love with a home here, they can't always wait for a similar one to hit the market. That gives sellers more leverage than you'd see in most other areas. The real reason I'm putting this area at number 4 on the list instead of number 1 is because in Q1 of 2025, there was a sale of a 100+ acre hobby farm for almost $3 million, which was an outlier and brought the overall average up. If we exclude that one sale in Q1 of 2025, the average drops to $1,317,000, which would make the actual loss 11.3%, and that moves rural Clarington to number 4. Coming in at number 3 on the list is Brooklyn in Whitby. This area had 88 sales in the first quarter of 2022 at an average price of $1,371,000. During the first quarter of this year, there were 63 sales at an average price of $1,220,000 for a total loss of about 11%. Brooklyn has really become its own little town. It feels very separate from the rest of Whitby. It's growing, but there's also a strong effort to keep that small town charm, and that's part of what people love about Brooklyn. It's a beautiful area with a low crime rate and an upscale boutique feel. There are multiple public and Catholic schools, high schools, and with the 407 tolls being removed between the 115 and Pickering, plus all of the new stores and restaurants in recent years, Brooklyn is becoming more convenient and self-sustainable. Before some of that growth, residents had to travel outside of the community for most shopping and groceries. But now there's a lot more located within Brooklyn itself, which makes it even more appealing for buyers and is allowing seniors to stay there longer. Homes here definitely command a premium compared to much of Whitby and the rest of Durham region. Because of that, a lot of properties here have extensive high-end upgrades, and many of those homes have held their value surprisingly well despite the market changes. Brooklyn is an interesting case because I found plenty of examples where homes sold in 2023 and then resold in 2025 for the same price or higher with no obvious changes done to the home. So demand here is still strong. That said, homes here are not completely unaffected. I also found some townhomes that sold for around $1 million again in 2023 and have since resold closer to $800,000, which I think is important to note. I think Brooklyn will continue to hold its value better than a lot of other areas, but there are homes here that are more susceptible to declines. Some of the big upgraded properties will probably stay relatively strong, but there are also some homes where honestly, the Brooklyn name and location carried the price more than the home itself. Those are the ones that I expect to see soften more as the market shifts. And while people will always pay extra to live in Brooklyn, it's not the only area in Durham region with nice homes. So as prices continue to fall elsewhere, Brooklyn will also probably come down a bit more too. Coming in at number 2 on this list is Brockridge in Pickering. During the first quarter of 2022, there were 20 sales at an average price of $1,307,000. In the first quarter of 2025, there were only 6 sales at an average price of $1,165,000. That's an average loss of 10.8%. Because there's such a small sample size for 2025, this one's probably not the most accurate reflection of how values have changed here over the last 3 years. When I looked at the sales, I didn't find many homes that had sold in 2022 and resold since at a major loss. But I did find a number of homes where if they sold today, they would probably be looking at a 20 to 25% drop. That said, while some homes in Q1 of 2022 sold for absolutely wild prices, there were quite a few that were higher than today's values, but not outrageous. For example, there were townhomes that sold for $1.2 to $1.35 million at the same time that detached homes with 2-car garages were selling for less. Now, those townhomes are probably worth 30% less today, but some of the detached homes might have only dropped 10% or so. Outside of a few over-the-top sales, a lot of the people who bought here in early 2022 didn't overpay as much compared to many other areas. In Q1 of 2022, the highest sale was $1.87 million for a 4-bedroom home with a basement apartment and 2,500 square feet above grade. In Q1 of 2025, the highest sale was $1.55 million, but that was for a much larger, higher-end home. And finally, the area that's held its value the best since the peak of the market is Rosebank in Pickering. Rosebank had 8 sales in the first quarter of 2022 at an average price of $1,728,000. And in the first quarter of 2025, there were 7 sales at an average price of $1,603,000. That's an average loss of only 7.2% from the 2022 peak. This is a pretty high-end area with a lot of unique homes you won't find anywhere else. Given it's a convenient location, relatively close to Toronto, and the fact that it's a safe, upscale neighborhood right by Lake Ontario and bordering Scarborough, I can absolutely see why people are willing to pay a premium to live here. In the first quarter of 2022, the highest sale was $2,175,000, and a very similar home sold earlier this year for $2,021,000. That's still a $150,000 drop, but that's incredible when you compare it to nearly every other area in Durham region, including other higher-end neighborhoods that have seen far steeper declines. I don't know what the future holds for this area, but I do think that it's going to continue to hold its value pretty well compared to other areas, especially the higher end unique homes. Now that I've covered the areas that have had prices drop the most and least, I want to know, would you be more willing to buy in an area that's already seen a 30% plus loss, or would you bank on these areas holding their value and weathering the storm? Let me know in the comments. If you're considering buying or selling a home in the near future, subscribe to the channel to get a realistic view of what's happening in our real estate market. You can also book a call with me using the link in the description if you've got any questions that you'd like answered. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I hope you found this video helpful, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.